Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I suspect it's over most people's lunch breaks, so I hope this is a good use of your time. Hopefully, we'll give you some good useful tips to take away at the end of this. Just to introduce myself, so I am Jenny. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Dragon Argent. So what we do here at Dragon Argent is we provide all the legal and accountancy and advisory support for fast growth businesses. So I'm delighted to introduce today our guest, Zahid. So Zahid, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, I can do that. Hi everyone. So Zahid Khimji here. I'm co-founder at Klyk, and Klyk is all about sustainable tech and cyber. My background is in consulting, so I've spent a number of years working at Accenture, Deloitte, and other consultancies, and also delivered a lot of projects across financial services organizations, so banks, insurance companies, stock exchanges, and also at the FCA, the regulator. And I'm very passionate about helping organizations become cyber resilient and protecting their confidential data.
Perfect. And then we're joined also with Freddie.
Hi, yeah, I'm Freddie-Nicolle. I'm head of corporate and commercial law here at Dragon Argent. So we do all things commercial, which obviously includes data, GDPR, and cyber, things like that.
So this is the first webinar that we've done actually, where we have done it with a partner. We've done a lot of webinars about specific topics that we do day to day. But from my point of view, one of my biggest worries about our business is the threat that cybersecurity poses. I'm obviously completely confident that we are set up in all the right ways, which you would expect given that we are a law firm. The cybersecurity part of things absolutely terrifies me. So, jumping in straight to the sort of scary bit, Zahid, what do you think are the biggest threats that you can see at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely a great place to start. And the first thing I'll tell you, Jenny, is that we're not alone. You know, a number of organizations, particularly startups, have the same concern about are we doing enough from a cyber perspective to protect not only our information, but also those of our key stakeholders, as customers, clients, our suppliers, and also the responsibility that we have to protect information. So the threat landscape, I guess if we look at that from two perspectives. One would be sort of at the macro level. Yeah. So we think about the geopolitical situation across the world, the connectivity that we have as organizations. We are all threats. We all cyber warfare is very, very real. Now, for startups, what does that mean to them? It's really important to think about this. Now, generally, for hacker groups, whether it's state-sponsored or they're activists, whether it's for financial gain or reputational damage, startups are always going to be a target, if not a bigger target for larger organizations. Why? Because those hacker groups know that the smaller organizations have less defense, less capability, less resource, less money, less expertise to build up that side of the defense. So it's always going to be a target. Secondly, the amount of IP and confidential information that can be sought from targeting small organizations is vast. That's the macro landscape. Secondly, if we look at where technology is going, there's so many advancements right now, digitalization, so much going on in the advancement of the adoption of technology just means that the threat landscape from a cyber perspective becomes much more big.
Yeah.
A couple of things briefly with regards to the micro, more specific targets and threats I need to think about. So email security is definitely one of them. So think about phishing attacks, spyware, malware, ransomware. These are all very, very real. And we all know of someone, an individual or an organization who's been targeted and sadly suffered from the consequences of what those attacks
were like. Eek. Oh, yeah, lots of words ending in where.
Yes.
Lots of just different, but I think that's it. We're just a smaller, easier target, aren't we? Small businesses. Yeah. So from a kind of data point of view, obviously you mentioned intellectual property and data. When you look at that element of companies and small businesses, what's scary? What's scary there?
Yeah, so data and security really go hand in hand. So what you've got is that you've got regulations relating to personal data, and obviously you've got to keep that safe and make sure that they are secure. So I'm going to kind of piggyback off what you just said, Zahid, about the ransomware and things like that. I'm just going to tell you about a couple of things that have happened quite recently. that you've probably heard of. If not, you probably should have. One is quite topical. It's about ChatGPT. I know that that's an up-and-coming AI program that everybody's been using. Everybody knows, you know, it exists and wants to have a go. But actually, not so long ago, it had a data breach. So there was, I think, around 9 hours it was, that there was a bug in the system, and that meant that credit card details and some headings, not the actual conversations, but some headings of conversations from users were circulated and fell into the hands of, you know, whoever was logged in at the time. That now has meant that ChatGPT is actually banned in Italy. So it's banned, and they're looking into it at the moment as to whether they will have to pay a massive, massive fine. And I think the fine at the moment is probably about $21 million. And if you think about it, only about 1.2% of people were actually affected by that data breach. But it's a £21 million fine. They can't operate in Italy anymore, and the window was only 9 hours. So it is really something that you need to pay attention to, because it can be catastrophic if it happens to you. And another instance where that's happened is actually Royal Mail. So you'd think, you know, being one of the big organisations, I know we talked about smaller ones being easier to infiltrate, but it still happens in the big organisations. They had a ransomware attack fairly recently, and what that meant was that I don't know really what to call them, a gang or hackers broke into the system, and they said, look, we've got all your personal data on your system now. Now imagine what that would have been. How many personal addresses, how many email addresses, how many names? They said, look, we're going to release it to you if you pay us X amount of money. And what was actually terrifying for the Royal Mail was that that amount of money was actually less than what they would have been fined for breaching the GDPR. So that is actually an incentive to pay it, which obviously that shouldn't be the case, but it is. They didn't pay it, thank God, but it can happen to you. So no company is safe. You know, you've got to be vigilant all the time. You've got to be looking, and you've really got to have data in the forefront of your mind as to what you're doing with it, where it is, how you're storing it. Because, like you said, we've all heard a story. You'd think it won't happen to you, but actually they're on the rise at the moment, data breaches, and you do have a responsibility to report any data breach. So you can't, you know, sweep it under the carpet. You can't think, oh, no one's going to know about it, because you do have to report it.
Report it, and also there's the responsibility to also inform your stakeholders. Yeah. So if you think about who's been impacted with regards to your clients and the data records that are now longer available or have been stolen, you have that responsibility to make those customers as clients aware of them.
Yeah, that's true. And what's even worse, if you want to think about it that way, is that the ICO actually in 2022 started publishing the names of businesses that have been fallen with a data breach. So it wasn't previously doing that, but now it is. So if anyone were to do due diligence on your company and have a look, if you have had a data breach, they might be able to find it on the ICO's website.
Right, so now that we're all sufficiently terrified, I think, I mean, certainly from my point of view, you know, my job covers a million different things, and there's a million different priorities every day. And I imagine that that's the same for a lot of people who run other small businesses. So it's hard finding the time to do things. It's hard to prioritize. So, you know, assuming then that in order to prevent anything, these things happen, we get the right foundation in place. What does that look like? Yeah,
really good question. Really good question. And again, as we said, a number of organizations are in a similar situation where perhaps they don't know where to start and where to begin. And as a topic, it can be very difficult to, you know, quite overwhelming to know where to begin that journey towards cyber resilience. So we'll talk through a few things that can be really helpful. I'd say the first thing to think about is what is the information that you're trying to protect? So what is it within the organization that you have what we'd call your crown jewels? So your IT, your most confidential information, what's the assets or the data that, should they be unavailable or compromised, that cause the most catastrophe or the most disruption to your organization? So first, working out what those assets are, where that data is held, what systems are they in, and starting by protecting those assets. The other thing to keep in mind is the three concepts around confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Really, really important as you start to build up what that journey looks like for cyber resilience. Let's talk through some of those sort of layers, because it's really important to think about defense in depth and the approach you take to build up cyber resilience. So the first thing to think about is the systems that you're using. which are the more core systems and are absolutely critical to your business operation? And what's the security you need to have around those? What's the network that you're connecting to? Where is your information stored? Are you cloud-based? Are you on-prem? Or is that a hybrid-based model? Thirdly, where do your people work from? You know, are you all in the office? Is it predominantly remote working, or like nowadays, it's remote, it's a hybrid-based model. So thinking about where people work from and what are the networks and systems that need to be protected. Email, email absolutely is a key, collaboration and communication tool. So thinking about access to email and the usage of email. And you think about each of these different layers, across the IT and the business stack, taking the right approach to have the right cyber solutions in place and the systems in place to protect information based on the level of risk and protecting against the threat profile. Really important to do.
We've got a list that we'll be following up after the webinar, and we'll be sharing with everybody so that you can everything that Zahid talked about, you'll get. So don't worry about scribbling things down. And Freddie, all our stuff that we talk about is on our website. So no need for scribbling. So from a data point of view, Freddie, and setting everything up, that side of things, what are the foundations on that?
Yeah, so before I go into that, actually, I picked up an point that you said there, Zahid, which was really good. And actually, a lot of clients that come to us have this issue, is that when you're selling something on a website, that is available in every country. So if someone is putting in their details on your website, which you've made as a UK company, but they're in, for example, the Ukraine or Egypt, you need to have in the back of your mind that that is where their data is coming from, and that will be a data transfer. So I just thought that was really important to highlight, because we get a lot of people that don't necessarily think about that, because, well, why would you? But that is really important to bear in mind if you are an e-commerce company. So yeah, in terms of data and what you should have in place, it's the law that if you're sharing data, you must have a written data agreement. So I see sometimes that we get commercial agreements that come in and they perhaps have one clause on data which says both parties will comply with the UK GDPR. That's not really enough. So what you would usually see is either a data addendum or a more robust set of terms and conditions which state, for example, the role that each party has. So when you're talking about data, there are two kind of main roles. One is a controller that controls the data. One is a processor that processes it. But they're not mutually exclusive, and you can be both. So it's really important that you have the agreement in place so that you know which category you're in, and you can govern how the data will be stored and transferred and limit your own liability. So that's not just a nice to have, that is an absolute must. So don't gloss over data protection in your commercial contracts with suppliers.
Okay, so we touched a little bit about regulation there. What are the things that we absolutely have to do? Now, obviously, we're a regulated law firm, so we abide by the SRA. But Freddie, starting with you this time, what are the regulations on the data protection? Talk a bit about GDPR then. Is there anything over and above that?
So obviously you have to comply with the law, which is the UK GDPR, and that could probably be a topic of a webinar itself. So I won't go into the ins and outs of that, but basically it's about integrity, as you said, it's about fairness, being transparent, and it's about accountability. So you have to be responsible for looking after that data. You have to only use it when you absolutely need to. And it's about putting the rights in the hands of the data subject, really. So obviously you have to comply with that. There isn't, to my knowledge, any overarching thing that goes above the UK GDPR. What you should be doing if, for example, you've got a lot of employees in another country, for example, or you're branching out in another country, the UK GDPR, although it is really good and it's really robust, we can't say that that would be enough to also ensure that you are complying with all the laws in that country. So if you are operating in more than one jurisdiction, it's well worth having a look at that and taking advice on that. You can get ISO certified, but you don't have to. Although in some industries, and I'm sure you'll know, in the tech industry and things like that, some suppliers, they just won't work with you if you don't have it. So it's just a certification that basically says that you are GDPR compliant. And is that easy to get, Zahid?
Yeah, great question. So the ISO you're referring to is 27001, which is all about information security. And absolutely, there is work required to stand up the capability and to achieve the ISO accreditation. So it's a bit of a journey to go on. I would thoroughly recommend, based on what the organization does, which industry it operates in, as you're rightly saying, Freddie, that having that ISO is a brilliant way of demonstrating to your stakeholders with information security requirements. It's a commitment that you can right from the top as leadership and throughout the organization, across your IT, across your operations, you've implemented the right policies and procedures, and of course the governance overarching.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's great for stakeholders, but not just that even. So for example, when you come to sell a company or when you get an investor that wants to come in, particularly in the US, I found, I don't know if you have the same kind of feeling, but they do always look at that in due diligence and they do always ask, do you have ISO certification? So it is well worth looking into, but it's not obviously legally required.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked earlier about sort of building up that cyber resilience journey, and a great way to start it is having a roadmap. But that roadmap has to be informed by the business. So knowing where is the business heading, if there's international expansion planned, is an exit, something that's definitely on that roadmap. So knowing where the organization's heading, what new products, services, new functionality, if there's a tool or a tech play here, knowing where that's heading and having the right intention with regards to your security is really, really important.
So from a regulatory point of view then, so we've talked about in ISO, the ISO side of things, what are the regulations in the cyber side?
Brilliant. So Freddie already talked about GDPR, which is really, really important to know with regards to data protection, the hearing of the GDPR requirements. It's the law now, which is really important. I'll touch a little bit about the regulator, right, the FCA. And for regulated business, it's really, really important to know what the FCA expects with regards to cyber, being able to operate in a cyber resilient manner. And one of the key themes the FCA talks about is having good cyber hygiene. And I'll break this down a little bit into some of the key areas to think about. One is definitely around vulnerability management. So performing regular scans to identify what vulnerabilities are there within your tech estate, both internally and also to any product or platform that you might be selling to the industry and to your customers as well. Secondly, around access control. So if you think about the level of access that users have internally towards systems, not everyone should be having the same level of access. Some will have more admin level access, perhaps as a super user. Others will be management level, others will be operational. So making sure you've got a clear view on what level of access each individual needs towards data. That's really, really important. And of course, when people leave the organization or they move to a different role, reducing and removing their access appropriately. Another area is around incident response. So if you were to suffer from an incident, we talked about some of those earlier, things like malware, ransomware, the consequences are very far reaching. But having an incident response plan is really, really important. So in that moment, you know exactly what you need to do. You know which systems are more critical to back up and restore. You know who needs to be notified. You know which roles or which external parties need to call upon and engage, who needs to be notified. So the response plan is really, really important. The FCA also talks about culture and awareness. So educating your people, whether they're employees or they're contractors or they're consultants, around what your expectations are and what your policy mandates and expects with regards to behaviors and the responsibility, the shared responsibility everyone has to protect information. The other thing to think about as well as the FCA is, and Jenny gave an example earlier with regards to legal firms. So knowing what the regulator or what the authoritative bodies within your industry would expect. So for example, if you're a health organization, knowing what the NHS expectations are with regards to the data security toolkit and what the mandate is there with regards to, as we talked about earlier, with regards to access control, cyber resilience, having a BCP, a business continuity plan in place, disaster recovery and backups. So lots of specific requirements with regards to the industry that you operate in as well to look at.
And in terms of places to find like templates for these sorts of things, I think there's a couple of links on the follow-up document that we'll send out to people to give you an idea of those.
Absolutely. I'll just share one of those now, actually. So a great resource that has a lot of valuable information, regardless of what industry and what size you're in, is the information that the NCSC has, the National Cybersecurity Center. And in recent months, they've really built up a wonderful library of assets, of resources, all freely available. And you can look up with regards to your organization size, the industry you're in, some really good tools, some fantastic information that you can freely access and start to get familiar with.
Okay, great. Is there anywhere that's good from a legal point of view for resources, like GDPR?
Yeah, so you can have a look on the ICO's website, and that does a really good job actually of explaining all of your obligations under the GDPR. That's something that is, I would say it was a thrilling read, but it's very, very informative, and it's actually really helpful. It's all in plain language, so all you'd have to do is go on there and have a look. Whilst we're here, actually, I just want to pick up on something that Zahid said. I think you described it brilliantly when you said it's like a roadmap. And I just want to point out something that basically highlights the relevance to startup companies. And that is in particular where you're a startup company that's tech enabled and you're developing an app or a platform or something like that, then you really, really do need to have data at the start of your roadmap. Because as you might have picked up on earlier, if your product has a bug and there's a data breach, who's going to invest in your product then? You know, you'd be back to square one. You might not have anybody that will be willing to buy your product because already it's got a bad reputation because there's been a data breach. So just at each stage of your business cycle, whether you're pre-seed or whether you're going for Series A, just make sure that you are covered.
And I'll add something onto that, that's okay. And I love how you described it, because ultimately the way that I approach cyber and so many others is around cyber's role as a business enabler. Because as you were talking about earlier, you know, investors will look to see, you know, what's the history of the organization? Have you suffered from a data breach? You know, have you suffered from a cyber attack? What's the incident response plans you have in place? How strong is that defense in depth and that layered approach to protect information? So it's very much, you know, seen nowadays as that business enabler to help you to succeed, you know, in the marketplace, to get new customers, and you're responding to proposals, being able to talk about the fact that you've got a strong, you know, cyber response and that roadmap to continue on that journey. Because if you stand still, then sadly, you're not going to be prepared for the threats of tomorrow. So it's a continuous journey, you know, refining, evolving and updating that roadmap and continuing to execute.
And it is a kind of thing that everybody is aware of now. Everybody knows about cybersecurity, everybody knows about data. So it's not just your investors, but it will be customers. So if you want to land a really big customer, they're going to want to know, is my data secure? It's suppliers, so they'll want to know that you've got everything in place to be able to process their data or vice versa. So it's all encompassing, really. It's not just at one part of your business. It is, and it should be, you know, a line through your business that carries you all the way from seed to an exit, and you just need to be covered.
So specifically, we've talked about the plans that you need to have if there is an incident. We've talked about making sure you've got the right policies in place. Are there any other kind of top things that businesses should do? So Freddie, starting with you.
Yeah, so what we always suggest is that you first do a data audit. So you go through your business and you figure out what data you're using, where it is, how long you're using it for, where you're storing it. And it's not just about the data that you have created and that you have for yourself. It's also any data that you're getting in from customers, suppliers. If you're sharing it, like I said, what data is coming through on your website. So that's a really, really good one to do, because then you will find out kind of the web of your data movement, and you'll be able to make sure that, you know, you have the correct policies and procedures, privacy notice, etc., all in place to cover that. So that's one thing. And that's kind of an internal really process and procedural audit. The other audit that we suggest is a commercial one. So that would be things like going through your contracts with customers and suppliers, making sure that data is addressed and that it's addressed properly, making sure that you've actually given thought to the data provisions, because it's no good if you're processing data, but your agreement says you're a controller. That leaves you really exposed. So things like that, just having a look through and making sure that everything reflects what is actually happening in your business.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. What about from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, very similar to what we were describing with regards to the internal document, would very much be around having a cyber policy. And I would say the best way to approach it is have it as an IT and cyber policy in one place, particularly for startup organizations. You know, having one document where the IT mandate and requirements along with cyber are captured together, because they very much go hand in hand. And the policy document typically will cover things like, you know, end user responsibilities, because as we said, everyone's responsible in the organization for protecting data and cyber. So end user responsibilities, access control, operational expectations, let's say around, you know, executing pen tests on a regular basis or vulnerability scans. So a pen test, and the full name being a penetration test, is where you bring in an ethical hacker, so a good guy.
Okay.
And what the good hacker will do is that they will try and penetrate your systems, try and hack into them, And they follow scripts and scenarios because they're looking for specific things. For example, how quickly can they get admin or let's say privilege level access to your systems? How quickly can they get access to confidential information? And at the end of the test, after they've done both manual test and also automated testing, they'll give you a report and say, here's all the vulnerabilities, here's all the bugs we found in your system, and here's rated on a risk basis and a remediation plan to go with it. Something that I would highly recommend that organizations perform, because having that external individual come in and test the robustness of your system, really important from a resilience perspective.
Yeah, I love an audit. I do. We have them every year as being part of the SRA, obviously, but that audit's part of our business. But there's a cyber one that we're doing at the moment, and there's an anti-money laundering one that we're about to do. So I think getting the external expertise in to just look at everything and give you a list and help you fix things is phenomenal.
Especially in terms of due diligence.
Yeah.
So when an investor or a potential acquirer comes to you, they probably ask you, actually, have you done an audit? I see very often actually in due diligence questionnaires and disclosure exercises, there is a question there that says, have you done a data audit? And if the answer is no, that doesn't give a very good impression, and they're going to ask why and think that maybe you're not compliant. So that can affect your purchase price and the value of your business. So they are really, really, really important and handy things to have.
And there's so many parallels that are all the topics which we're talking about today. If you look at cyber and data, we talked about the importance of policies, and they'll be linked together. So quite often the IT and cyber policy will call out and reference the data policy, the data protection, the need for a data audit, because the IT and cyber policy also has the information classification handling guides that helps you to classify and handle data in an according way, which all the way down from highly confidential down to internal, down to public information. So you've got a good view of classifying and handling information correctly. Another recommendation I'll throw out there as well is with regards to training. So, making sure that your team members are aware of their responsibilities, the do's and the don'ts, what is it that they're expected to do with regards to handling information, cybersecurity, creating that sort of savviness and that culture around, looking for something that could be malicious, and knowing where to go to get help and advice is really, really important, because unfortunately, it's the end user that's going to be targeted, by malware or by email spoofing or email impersonation that leads to something malicious happening. So it's really important to create a culture and that awareness around what is cyber and creating the right, awareness around that.
And that's something that Founders are pretty good at, isn't it? It's being forward thinking, because let's be honest, the world is moving online. It's just going to keep going and going and going. If you don't keep up with it, then you're the one that's going to be left behind. So, yeah.
So with what we do training is we do every year, everybody does cybersecurity training and then anti-money laundering training, and we have found that it does work. It's quite an interactive tool, but actually one of the things that we've learned recently is we've gone through it again, and actually it's been the same. The training provider that we've used has actually just not changed their course. It's been the same course. So we've now swapped it up a bit to make sure that it's different, because the last thing we want to do is put training in place, but then actually it be repetitive and not actually adding value, not actually challenging and moving with the times and the threats. So get training, but continue to check that it is moving and being updated.
So important because we talked about how the threat landscape is changing.
Yeah.
So those attack vectors that are being used by the hackers are going to change all the time. The regulatory landscape is evolving. We talked about GDPR, data security, the cyber expectations. So making sure that the training is relevant, it applies to your industry, and the case studies and examples it gives are appropriate for your people and your organization to know about. So that mixture between sort of online e-learning and perhaps also in-person or webinar type training is really, really important to keep it interactive and informative.
Yeah, talking about the change, there's already actually a bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, which aims to make the cost of complying with GDPR less, make it a bit less of a burden, but it also does other things like for example, reduces the use of the consent pop-ups when you have cookies and things like that. There's a lot of different things that it's kind of realised that since the GDPR, actually, no one's actually really said anything about this yet, or it's not quite working. So, even the law is changing all the time. So that's just something to keep your ear open for. It's not passed yet, it's not law yet, but it is up and coming. And you can, if you go to the government website, have a look at the bill itself and kind of see what it's aiming to do.
And that's something that presumably in the future we can share some more information about.
Yeah, when it comes into law, yeah.
When it comes into law. From a certification point of view, we've talked, we've talked about the ISO certification.
Yeah.
What about from a cyber perspective? I know Cyber Essentials is certainly something we've spoken about.
Absolutely. Cyber Essentials is absolutely something that should be on that roadmap of startup organizations in particular to attain. And it's more achievable in a faster time period than getting the ISO. And absolutely something to look at. So 2 levels of Cyber Essentials. There's a Cyber Essentials and then there's a Cyber Essentials Plus, which is the more advanced level. And number one, the cost of attaining it is very doable. So if your organization is up to 9 employees, the assessment is £300, and then the pricing scales up. So for a few £100, you can get that. What does it cover? So the Cyber Essentials, the basic level, looks at technical controls. There's 5 key areas of it. So it looks at things like anti-malware, access control, and what are the sort of cyber hygiene things that we talked about earlier? How do you have those in place? How Cyber Essentials works is that it's a self-assessment questionnaire. So you can fill it in yourself, you send it in, and then the auditor from Cyber Essentials, the authoritative body is an organization called IASME Consortium, and an auditor on behalf of IASME, and that £300 if you're up to 9 employees covers the cost of that. So your questionnaire will then be reviewed, validated, and should you meet their criteria, you'll then receive the Cyber Essentials. And that's a great, certification that you can then tell, your customers, your investors all about that you are Cyber Essentials. And at the right time, as you move along your roadmap, you can then start to think about Cyber Essentials Plus, which goes into a lot more detail. So as well as the self-assessment questionnaire, there's also a technical test to look at those controls a lot more closer. Now, the cost of the Cyber Essentials Plus will depend on the size of your organization, but also the complexity of your network. But again, very, very attainable, and both of those are something to look at.
Any other certifications on the legal side, or is it just the ISO?
Yeah, it's just the ISO really. I'm sure that you could go online and probably have a look and see if there are any GDPR training certificates you could get personally. They wouldn't, be any harm in getting. Investors don't usually ask for them, but if you are, for example, wanting to be a B corporation or anything like that, that can help you in your application. So it's always worth just having it in the back of your mind, having a look and seeing what's available and what's out there. And like I said, it doesn't have to be really expensive. I'm sure a short GDPR certificate course, wouldn't cost you thousands of pounds, I hope, touch wood. But like I say, it may be useful to you to show to investors, to show to customers, for any B Corp applications. Just anything you can do that shows that you are taking data seriously is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And just picking up on the ISO, so we talked earlier about ISO 27001, and the great thing about that, it's a wonderful complement if you're looking at other ISOs who already have them. So things like 9001 around quality management. These all go together, or 14,001. These all work together really, really well, and very similar concept with regards to standing up a management system. So for 27001, it's all around the information security management system, and building out those controls with regards to designing the controls, but then also implementing the control, and then having the right governance structure around that ISMS with regards to how you execute, how you measure, and how you continuously improve those information security controls. So highly recommend being looked at. We're seeing right now a lot of interest in getting the ISO, because as we talked about earlier, it's a business enabler, and it's a great way to demonstrate that you take information security seriously.
Perfect. Well, before we go on, I can see that there's a couple of questions, but we'll answer them and we'll come and have a look at them in a second. So the last question really to each of you, and so we can start with you, is when you look forward, when you look at the future, how can you see, obviously you don't have a crystal ball, so you don't have a perfect answer, but what can you see coming in the cyberspace?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start by maybe looking backwards a little bit. So there was a government report just issued, in the last few days, which talked about small organizations and how sadly are not taking cyber as seriously as just a year ago. So the amount of resource and effort being put towards cybersecurity is not increasing as it should, and it needs to, because the threat landscape is ever evolving. And as we talked about earlier, all of the data and stats shows that startup organizations are a clear target. So really, really important to make sure that cybersecurity becomes a boardroom topic. It's looked at strategically and it becomes a business enabler. So that's really, really important to look at. Secondly, with regards to the future, so we all know about the advancements being made with regards to technology adoption. And if anything, we're very much on the crest of a new evolution around technology. Just talk about the adoption of AI. There is so much going on right now across the industry, and lots of organizations, regardless of what industry or size you are looking to adopt these innovative solutions. Why? Because you're going to make your product, your service, more appropriate and industry leading. So as you go through those journeys to increase your use of technology, it's really important to think about information security, how data is going to be protected, making sure you've got the roadmap, aligned with regards to your product development and evolution, and making sure that information security is being baked into that. So thinking about, things like vulnerability scans and penetration tests, of the product and services that you're offering. So the threat landscape is only ever getting worse, and it's really important to think about what is it we do from a cybersecurity perspective, have that roadmap in place, and make sure that leadership, in the C-suite is focused around the delivery of that.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like you say, the world is going online, and the legislators and the regulators, they're aware of that. It is a common topic, and like you say, it should be discussed more in smaller businesses. A lot of different people are opening their eyes to the harm that obviously the internet can do. So, for example, there are things like the safety bill that's going through around children's details online, and social media having to remove illegal and harmful content, things like that. So it's changing all the time and it's developing all the time. But what I would say is that obviously, as long as you've got in the back of your mind that you're complying with the law, you're operating in good faith, you're being transparent, you're being accountable, and that's the main thing, is that you have to be accountable, you have to know what you're doing and why, then you should be on the right path. And it's just about keeping your eyes open, because 10 years from now, who knows where we'll be in terms of technology, but with that obviously comes exposure to risk. So it's just about having that in the forefront of your mind, and knowing that as we move closer to a more technological world, we do also need to think about the bad things as well.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, both. Hopefully that's armed everybody with some scary bits about why this is really important, but also some practical starting points about what to do. Now we've got a question, so hold on, let me just have a little look. Excuse me, reaching over here, see what it says. So Ben, oh, the audio is quite hard to hear. Sorry, Ben.
We will have a recording now.
Yeah, there will be a recording, and I hope that you've been able to follow it okay. If there's no other questions, then I'll just thank both Zahid and Freddie very much. If anybody has any follow-up conversations that they'd like, we'll share both Freddie and Zahid's contact details, along with particularly there's a cyber guide as to the key points. So we'll share them afterwards, and just thank you very much for spending your lunch break listening to us.